Braga, Amares, welcomed the Tompkins couple with soft June sunshine and cool breezes off the Atlantic Ocean. Serena and Mo chose this small coastal town for their first one-year anniversary, a wedding anniversary that was supposed to be a celebration of their love, but turned tragic. Serena Higgs William, 25 years old, stood on the balcony of the rented cottage, watching the waves crash against the coastal rocks. Her slender figure, clad in a light navy-colored summer dress, seemed fragile against the mighty ocean. Her dark curly hair was ruffled by the wind, and her eyes reflected serene happiness. Nothing foreshadowed that in 48 hours, those same eyes would be full of terror and despair. "Look at this view, Mo," she called to her husband, who was unpacking his suitcases in the bedroom. "I think I fell in love with this place at first sight." Mike William, 29 years old, joined her, putting his arm around her shoulders. A tall, athletic man with a short haircut and a well-groomed beard, he radiated confidence and success. A Wall Street financial analyst, he rarely allowed himself a vacation, but he made an exception for Zara. "I told you you'd like it," he smiled, kissing his wife on the temple. This town wasn't as popular with tourists as Portland, but it had its own charm. The first 2 days of their vacation were filled with simple pleasures. Long walks along the waterfront, the freshest seafood in the local restaurants, leisurely conversations to the sound of the surf. Serena enjoyed the opportunity to spend time with her husband without the constant calls and notifications from work. An elementary school teacher, she had always treasured these moments of intimacy. On the evening of the third day, they decided to have a romantic dinner at the cottage. Serena cooked shrimp according to a special recipe she had learned from her grandmother, and Mo opened a bottle of expensive wine brought especially for the occasion. "To us," he toasted, raising his glass, "to the year that changed my life for the better." Serena smiled as she clinked her glass with his. "And here's to many years ahead," she added. The dinner was warm and relaxed, but Zara noticed that Mo grew more and more pensive with each glass of wine. His gaze occasionally clouded over as if he was somewhere far away in his thoughts. "Is something wrong?" she asked, covering his hand with hers. "It's like you're not here." Mo took a deep breath as if gathering his strength. "Serena, there's something I need to tell you," he began, an unfamiliar nervousness in his voice. "I've been thinking for a long time about whether I should even do this, but I can't keep it to myself anymore."
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Serena felt a chill run down her spine. Something in her husband's tone made her wary. "Do you remember how we met at the charity event 2 years ago?" Mo continued without waiting for her answer. "I said then that it was fate. But what if I lied?" "What are you talking about?" Serena frowned, setting her glass aside. "Our meeting was no accident," Mo said, looking her straight in the eye. "I knew about you long before that night. I've studied your habits, your hobbies, where you go, and I did everything I could to be at that charity event." Serena felt the room begin to spin around her. The memories of their first meeting, which had seemed so magical and spontaneous, suddenly took on an ominous tinge. "But why?" was all she could squeeze out. "Because I needed to be with you," Mo answered. a mixture of guilt and determination in his eyes. 3 months before we met, I did something terrible. And you were my redemption. Mo took a deep breath and began to tell a story that made his blood run cold. He talked about a girl named Tasha Morton who he had dated before Lillian, about a fight that had gotten out of hand, about how, in a fit of rage, he'd pushed her and she'd hit her head on the edge of the table. The panic when he realized she wasn't breathing and the life-changing decision to get rid of the body and start over. I buried her in the woods outside of town, Mo finished quietly. And then I met you and realized this was my chance to be a different person, a better man. Serena sat motionless, stunned by what she had heard. Her husband, the man she had shared her bed, her dreams, and her future plans with, had turned out to be a murderer. And worse, he had purposely entered her life, manipulating her from the beginning. Why are you telling me this now? She asked, surprised at the calmness of her voice as the storm of emotions raged inside. Because I can't live a lie anymore, Mo answered. Because I love you, and I want there to be no secrets between us. I know this could ruin everything, but I'm willing to accept the consequences. Serena stood up from the table, trying to comprehend the situation. Her mind was working feverishly, analyzing every moment of their relationship through the lens of new information. All the cute coincidences, all the chance encounters, suddenly took on an ominous meaning. You need time, I understand, Mo said, watching her reaction. I'll be at the beach if you want to talk. He walked out of the house, leaving Serena alone with her thoughts, which were growing darker and darker by the minute. She mechanically began clearing the table when her gaze fell on a steak knife, sharp with a serrated blade. An hour later, Serena found Mo on the deserted beach. He was sitting on the sand, looking up at the stars, and didn't seem at all surprised to see her. I was hoping you would come, he said quietly. I had to, Serena replied, sitting down beside him. I have too many questions. The conversation went on for a long time. Mo answered all her questions honestly, not trying to justify himself or minimize his guilt. With every word he said, Serena felt her disgust and anger growing. The man she loved had turned out to be a monster, using her as a means to clear his conscience. And did you really think I could just accept that? She asked when the moon was already high above the horizon. That we could go on with our lives as if nothing had happened? I hoped that you would see what I've become because of you, Mo answered. That you would realize that I am no longer the man who committed this crime. But you are the man who lied to me all this time, Serena objected, standing up. The one who manipulated me, used me. She clutched in her pocket the hilt of the knife she had taken from the house, originally for self-defense in case Mo reacted aggressively to her questioning. But now the knife seemed like an instrument of justice. I can't live like this, Mo, she said, taking a step toward him. I can't wake up every morning next to a man who built our lives on lies and other people's deaths. Mo stood up, holding out his arms to her. Serena, please, let's talk about this. I'm still the man you fell in love with. No, Serena shook her head. That man never existed. The movement was quick, almost reflexive. Serena snatched the knife and plunged it into Mo's chest with a force she hadn't expected herself. His eyes widened in shock and pain, his hands instinctively grasping the hilt of the knife. Serena, he wheezed, falling to his knees. But Serena didn't hear him anymore. She watched the dark blood soak through his shirt and felt a strange desolation. No relief, no satisfaction. just emptiness and the realization of what she had just done. Mo slumped to the sand, his breathing becoming more and more intermittent. Serena stood motionless, watching the life leave the man she had once loved more than anything in the world. In a few minutes, it was over. Mike William, financial analyst, assassin, and her husband, was dead. Panic came over Serena in a wave as the reality of what had happened began to reach her consciousness. She looked around, making sure the beach was still empty. Then, acting almost mechanically, she began to cover her tracks. The tide was due in an hour. Serena decided to use this to her advantage. She dragged Mo's body closer to the water to make it look like an accident. Then she carefully erased her footprints in the sand and hid the knife among the coastal rocks, planning to dispose of it later. Back at the cottage, Lillian showered, washing off the blood and sand. Her movements were methodical, as if she was doing a familiar chore. She gathered all the things that could link her to the murder and stashed them in a bag she planned to throw away on the way to the airport. The plan was simple. In the morning, she would report her husband missing, saying he had gone for a night out and hadn't returned. There would be panic, a search, and eventually the body would be found in the ocean. By then, she'd be in New York, playing the part of the grief-stricken widow. But fate had it differently. A pair of early runners discovered Mo's body at dawn before the tide could carry it out to sea. Braga police arrived on the scene at 6 o'clock in the morning, and by 7 o'clock, 2 detectives were already standing at the door of the William cottage. Lieutenant Tavis Peterson, 42 years old, was a veteran of the homicide squad with a reputation for always following through. Tall, with shrewd eyes and short-cropped graying hair, he exuded a quiet confidence. His partner, Detective Nicky Pute, 35, was his complete opposite. Energetic, sharp in judgment, with a sharp tongue and an equally sharp mind. Mrs. William, Peterson addressed Serena, who opened the door. "I'm Lieutenant Peterson. This is Detective Pute. May I come in? We have some bad news." Serena let the detectives into the house, carefully maintaining an expression of worry and concern on her face. She had already changed into her home clothes and mussed her hair, creating the image of a woman who had spent a sleepless night waiting for her husband. "What's wrong? Is it Mo? Did something happen to him?" She rattled on, playing the part of the worried wife. "I'm afraid so," Peterson replied, watching her carefully. "A man's body was found on the beach this morning. We've determined from the paperwork that it's your husband, Mo William." Serena sank down onto the couch, covering her face with her hands. Her shoulders shook with sobs that seemed quite genuine. Detective Pute cast a quick glance at her partner. They'd both seen enough grieving relatives to distinguish real emotion from fake emotion. "I'm sorry, Mrs. William, but we need to ask you some questions," Peterson said, sitting down across from her. "When did you last see your husband?" "Last night," Serena answered, wiping away her tears. "We had dinner, and then he said he wanted to go for a walk on the beach to think. He'd had a hard week at work before his vacation, and he often did that. Went alone to clear his head." "What time was that?" Pute asked, pulling out a notebook. "About 9 o'clock, maybe a little later." Serena tried to sound focused despite her shock. "I didn't look at my watch." "And when did you realize he wasn't back?" Peterson continued. "I fell asleep waiting for him." Lillian shook her head. "When I woke up around 4 o'clock in the morning and saw he was gone, I started to worry. I called him, but his cell phone was out of range. I was about to go to the police when you knocked." The detectives looked at each other. The story sounded plausible, but something about Lillian's behavior alarmed them both, too collected for a woman who had just learned of her husband's death. Mrs. William, Peterson leaned forward. I need you to understand the gravity of the situation. Your husband didn't drown or die in an accident. He was murdered, stabbed to death. Serena flinched, her eyes widening with horror or well-played surprise. Murdered? But who? How? She stammered, as if she couldn't find the words. That's what we intend to find out, Pute said firmly. And we're going to need your full support. Of course, anything. Ziria nodded, her hands clasped in her lap. Great. Peterson stood up. We need you to come with us to the station for an official statement. And if you don't mind, we'd like to take a look at your house. Why? Zora was suddenly alarmed. Standard procedure, Peterson explained with a slight smile that didn't touch his eyes. We are looking for any leads that might help us find your husband's killer. Serena nodded slowly, feeling a chill of fear run down her spine. She hadn't considered that the police might want to search the house. What if she had missed something? Some detail that would give her away. Yeah. Can I change my clothes first? She asked, pointing to her home clothes. Of course, Peterson nodded. Detective Pute can come with you. Help if necessary. It wasn't a suggestion, but a demand, and Lillian realized it. They weren't going to leave her alone for a minute. Okay, she agreed, rising. While Lillian changed her clothes under Pute's watchful eye, Peterson began to look around the living room and kitchen. His experienced eye immediately spotted the signs of hasty cleanup. The table had been wiped too thoroughly, and the garbage can was filled with the uneaten remains of a dinner for two. When Lillian came out of the bedroom ready to go to the station, Peterson met her with a hard stare. Mrs. William, I have to ask, are you sure you've told us everything that happened last night? Serena froze for a moment, then nodded slowly. Yes, everything I remember. Good, Peterson said, opening the door. Because the truth always comes to the surface. It always does. As she walked out of the house, accompanied by the two detectives, Serena felt panic growing inside her. She had killed a man, her husband, and now she was at the center of an investigation where her every word, every gesture would be scrutinized under a microscope. She would have to be very careful, very convincing, because it wasn't just her freedom at stake. It was her life. In the police car, looking at the cottage where she and Mo had been happy yesterday, Serena realized that her life had changed forever, and the question now wasn't whether she could go back to normal, but whether she could even get away with what she had done. The Braga Main police station was a typical two-story red brick building with a flag flying at the entrance. Inside was the usual bustle of the morning shift. Ringing phones, shouting police officers, the noise of a coffee machine in the corner. In interrogation room 2, however, there was an oppressive silence. Lieutenant Tavis Peterson sat across from Serena William, placing a thin folder of preliminary case files in front of him. The young woman looked exhausted, dark circles under her eyes, nervously interlocked fingers, a gaze that wandered around the room without lingering on anything in particular. Mrs. William, let's go over the events of last night again. Peterson began calmly, turning on the recorder. You said your husband went for a walk around 9 o'clock last night, correct? Lillian nodded, then on reflection, answered aloud. Yes, about that time. We had dinner, and he was upset about something and said he wanted to get some air. Upset? Peterson was interested. Did you two have a fight? No. Serena shook her head. Not a fight. It's just that he had some kind of confession. The detective raised an eyebrow, watching her reaction carefully. A confession? What kind of confession? Serena took a deep breath. She realized she was now entering dangerous territory. One wrong move could give her away, but a piece of truth could sound more convincing than a complete lie. Macchio told me something. Terrible things, she said quietly, lowering her eyes. About what he'd done before we were married. Peterson stepped forward, his interest clearly piqued. What was it? Serena stammered as if she had trouble saying the words. He confessed to killing his ex-girlfriend, a woman named Tasha Morton. There was a heavy silence in the room. Peterson maintained a nonchalant expression, but his eyes scrutinized every feature of Serena's face. That's a serious accusation, he said at last. And how did you react to such a confession? I was shocked, Serena answered, and there was sincerity in her voice. I couldn't believe it, Emo. He always seemed so calm, so poised. I couldn't imagine that he was capable of murder. What happened next? I told him I needed to think. He left for the beach, and I stayed home, trying to make sense of what I'd heard. Peterson paused, leafing through his notes. And you didn't go after him? No. Serena shook her head. I mean, not right away. But then I realized I couldn't just sit around and wait. I needed answers. So, I went to the beach to look for him. And did you find him? Yes, Serena swallowed. He was there, sitting on the sand, looking up at the stars. I went up to him and we started talking. About what exactly? About his confession, about Tasha, about how it happened. He told me they had a fight. He pushed her. She hit her head. Serena spoke more and more quietly, as if she were sinking into a memory. And then he said, he buried her body in the woods and came into my life on purpose to make things right. Used me as a kind of redemption. Peterson listened intently, not interrupting. When Serena was silent, he asked the next question. What happened next, Mrs. Tompkins? Serena looked up at him with a mixture of fear and determination. He got aggressive, she said. When he realized I wasn't going to just forget about it and go on with my life as if nothing had happened. He said he wouldn't let me ruin our life, that I had to understand him, forgive him. And when I said no, he attacked me. He attacked you? Peterson interjected. In what way? He grabbed me by the shoulders, started shaking me, Lillian said, showing growing agitation. He shouted that I had no right to judge him, that I should be grateful for everything he'd done for me. And then he pulled out a knife. A knife? Peterson raised an eyebrow. Where did he get a knife from on the beach? Serena froze for a moment, realizing her mistake. I don't know, she said quickly. Maybe he took it from home before he left. I wasn't paying attention. It all happened so fast. Go on, Peterson nodded, making a note in his notebook. He threatened me with a knife. Told me that if I told anyone about Tasha, he would. Ziria paused as if gathering her strength. He'd kill me the way he killed her. I was scared, and we started fighting. Somehow, I managed to grab the knife from him and I stabbed him once to defend myself. You stabbed him in self-defense? Peterson clarified. Yes, Lillian replied firmly. I didn't mean to kill him. I was just defending myself. Peterson leaned back in his chair, scrutinizing the woman in front of him. Why didn't you call the police immediately after the incident? I panicked. Lillian lowered her eyes. I was afraid no one would believe me. Husband dead. Wife holding a bloody knife. Who would believe self-defense? Yeah, I made a mistake. I tried to cover it up. I'm sorry. At that moment, the door to the interview room opened and Detective Nikki Pute walked in. She nodded to Peterson, letting him know she needed to talk to him. Excuse me, Mrs. Tompkins. Peterson stood up. We're going to take a short break. Would you like some water? Coffee? Water, please, Serena replied quietly. Stepping out into the hallway, Peterson turned to his partner. What do you got? Forensics have finished their preliminary examination of the crime scene, Pute reported. And there's something interesting. No signs of a struggle. According to the sand and the position of the body, there was no struggle. One clean stab to the heart. Professional, I'd say. Peterson rubbed his chin thoughtfully. And her story of self-defense called for an active fight. Exactly, Pute nodded. And another thing, we found a knife hidden among the rocks near the murder scene. There's only one person's prints on it. Let me guess, Peterson said. Mrs. Tompkins. Bullseye, confirmed Pute. And no trace of the husband on the handle. Plus, the knife was from the kitchen set in their cottage. We checked. Peterson shook his head. So, she was lying then. But why kill the husband? Because of his confession. It's too emotional, Pute suggested. Don't forget, he just told her he killed a woman and manipulated her for years. I'd be angry too. Yeah. But angry enough to kill? Peterson didn't seem convinced. We need to check out this Tasha Morton thing. If she really existed and disappeared, as Serena claims. Already working on it, Pute said. I've sent a request to New York and we're waiting to hear back. In the meantime, we've got a man who claims to be the deceased's best friend. A guy named Dante Greer says he has information on the case. Peterson nodded. All right. I'll finish with Mrs. Tompkins and talk to him. Keep her under observation while I'm with Greer. Back in the interrogation room, Peterson placed a glass of water in front of Lillian and sat down across from her. Mrs. Tompkins, I have some doubts about your version of events, he began bluntly. Forensics found no signs of a struggle at the crime scene. If you were defending yourself from an attack, as you claim, there should have been corresponding marks in the sand. Serena visibly tensed, her fingers gripping the glass tighter. Yeah, I don't remember the details. It all happened so fast. One more thing, Peterson continued. The knife used to kill your husband belongs to the set from your cottage. Only your fingerprints are on it. How do you explain that? Serena was silent for a few seconds, obviously trying to find a suitable answer. Perhaps he took the knife with his gloves on, she suggested uncertainty. Or did I not see him take it before he left? Mrs. Tompkins, Peterson leaned forward. I think you should think again and tell the truth. If your husband did confess to the murder and you were acting under great emotional distress, it might be a mitigating factor. Serena lowered her eyes, her shoulders slumped. I can't admit to something I didn't do, she whispered. Good. Peterson stood up. We're done for the day. You remain under suspicion, Mrs. Tompkins, and you can't leave town until the investigation is complete. Detective Pute will escort you out. Leaving the interrogation room, Peterson headed into the adjoining room where a man in his early 30s, tall with a neat beard and attentive eyes, was waiting for him. He tapped his fingers nervously on the desk. Mr. Greer, Peterson held out his hand. Lieutenant Tavis Peterson, thank you for coming. Dante Greer shook the detective's hand firmly. I should have come as soon as I heard the news. I can't believe M.O. is dead. Were you too close? Peterson asked, sitting down across from him. Best friend since college? Dante nodded. 15 years of friendship. I was the best man at his wedding to Ziria. And what can you tell me about their relationship? Dante thought for a moment, rubbing his chin. On the surface, everything looked perfect. M.O. had been crazy about Serena from the moment they met. She seemed like the perfect wife, supportive, understanding. But, Peterson rushed him. There was something only I knew. Dante said quietly. Something that Mo had kept hidden from everyone, including Serena, at least until recently. What was it? Dante took a deep breath. A couple of weeks ago, Mo called me very excited, said he was going to tell Serena everything during their vacation, that he couldn't live a lie anymore. Tell you what? Peterson stepped forward. About Tasha Morton, Dante answered. About what happened 3 years ago. Peterson felt a chill run down his spine. So that part of Ziria's story was true. Tell me about Tasha Morton, he asked. Tasha was Mo's girlfriend before Lillian, Dante began. They dated for about a year. The relationship was complicated. Tasha was emotionally unstable, constantly throwing jealous fits. Eventually, Mo decided to end the relationship. What happened? The official version is that Tasha couldn't handle the breakup and left town, started a new life somewhere in California. Dante shook his head. But the truth is much worse. Is she dead? Peterson asked bluntly. Yes, Dante answered quietly. Matteo told me the truth about 6 months after she disappeared. They had a fight. She threatened him, waved a knife at him. At some point he pushed her. She fell, hit her head on the edge of the table and didn't get up, and he got rid of the body. Yes, Dante nodded. Buried it in the woods outside of town. Panicked, didn't know what to do. Later, when the police started investigating her disappearance, he created a false trail, used her credit card, sent a couple of emails in her name to make it look like she just left. Peterson made a few notes in a notebook, and no one suspected anything amiss. Given Tasha's erratic behavior, her sudden departure didn't raise much suspicion. Dante shrugged. The case was quickly closed. And then he met Lillian, Peterson said thoughtfully. Yes, but not by accident. Dante lowered his eyes. He was looking for her on purpose. What do you mean? Macchio saw Serena at a charity event where she was volunteering. She struck him as pure, innocent, the exact opposite of Tasha, and he thought she could be his redemption, his second chance. He was stalking her. Peterson frowned. Not in the classic sense. Dante shook his head. He studied her habits, found out where she went, what she liked. Then he'd arranged a chance meeting at a charity event. Did everything he could to charm her. Peterson leaned back in his chair, digesting what he'd heard. And you're saying that he'd recently decided to confess everything to her? Yes, Dante confirmed. He said he couldn't live a lie anymore, that Lillian deserved to know the truth. I tried to talk him out of it. Why destroy what they had? But he insisted he had to be honest with her. How do you think she might have reacted to that confession? Dante thought for a moment. Serena always struck me as a sensible woman. But to find out that your husband killed his ex-wife and manipulated you from the beginning, he shook his head. I don't know. That would have broken anyone. Enough to kill him? Peterson asked bluntly. Yeah, I don't know, Dante answered honestly. I've never seen her aggressive or violent. But people sometimes do unpredictable things in extreme situations. Peterson nodded, then asked the next question. Mr. Greer, can you confirm the location of Tasha Morton's body? Did Macchio ever show you the location? No. Dante shook his head. He described the approximate location to me, but he never took me there. He said it was somewhere in the Ramsdale Forest, about 20 miles north of New York. I see. Peterson made another note. Thank you for your help, Mr. Greer. We may need your official statement later. After Dante left, Peterson returned to his office where Pute was waiting for him with new information. "I checked the missing persons database," she reported. "Tasha Morton did exist and was reported missing 3 years ago. 26 years old, working for an advertising agency in New York City. The case was closed after evidence surfaced that she had voluntarily left the city." "What kind of evidence?" Peterson asked. "Charges to her credit card in Los Angeles, emails to friends saying she needed a fresh start," Pute listed. "But according to Greer, Tompkins set it all up." Peterson nodded, drumming his fingers on the table. "We need to contact the NYPD and reopen the investigation into Morton's disappearance. If we find her body, we'll have confirmation of Lillian's story," Pute finished. "And a possible motive for Tompkins' murder." "Exactly," Peterson agreed. "But I'm still confused by the lack of signs of a struggle. If Tompkins did attack her with a knife, as Lillian claims, there should have been evidence. Maybe she just panicked and made up a story about self-defense," Pute suggested. "She heard her husband's confession, was shocked, took the knife from the house, and went to the beach." "Maybe," Peterson nodded. "But we can't prosecute on speculation. We need facts." Over the next few days, detectives immersed themselves in an investigation into M.O. Tompkins' past. They went through his financial records, his phone history, his emails, anything that might shed light on his relationship with Tasha Morton and Lillian. A particularly interesting find was a series of payments to a private investigator 3 months before he met Serena. Further investigation revealed that the detective was gathering information about Lillian's daily life, her schedule, hobbies, and friends. "That confirms what Greer said," Peterson noted, reviewing the detective's reports. "Tompkins really did make a deliberate entry into Lillian's life. Planned it all in advance." "It's pretty creepy," Pute grimaced. "Imagine your husband had been stalking you all this time and you didn't even know." Meanwhile, the NYPD began a new search of Ramsdale Woods based on information provided by Dante Greer. On the 5th day of the search, they received a call that they had found human remains. Peterson and Pute were in their office when an email arrived with preliminary forensic results. "Female, aged 25 to 30, Peterson read aloud. "Death occurred approximately 3 to 4 years ago as a result of head trauma. Dental records match Tasha Morton's." "So, that part of the story is true," Pute said thoughtfully. "Tompkins did kill his ex-girlfriend and covered up the crime, and from the looks of it, really manipulated Serena from the beginning," Peterson added. "The question is, does that justify killing him?" Pute shrugged. "It's not for us to decide. Our job is to gather the facts and present them to the prosecutor." "Right," Peterson nodded. "And we still have a discrepancy in Lillian's testimony about self-defense. We need to talk to her again. Maybe now that we have confirmation about Tasha, she'll be more forthcoming." The next morning, they called Serena back to the station. She looked even more exhausted than the last time, as if she hadn't slept all week. "Mrs. William," Peterson began, "we have some new information we'd like to share with you." Serena nodded silently, clutching a glass of water. "We found Tasha Morton's body," the detective reported, watching the woman's reaction carefully. Serena flinched, her eyes widening. "You found her?" she whispered. "Yes, in Ramsdale Forest, just like your husband said. The forensics confirmed that she died of head trauma, which is consistent with your account of Emo's confession." Serena covered her face with her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "Then it's true," she said through her tears. "All this time, I hoped he was lying, that it was some cruel joke or test. We also found evidence that your husband had indeed been following you before you met. Peterson continued. He was hiring a private investigator to gather information about you, planning a chance meeting. Serena looked up at him with a look of pain and disgust. My whole life with him was a lie, she whispered. Every moment, every memory, it was all part of his plan. Mrs. William Peterson said softly, I understand that you suffered a great emotional shock when you learned the truth about your husband. And I believe that's what led to the tragedy on the beach. But there are inconsistencies in your story of self-defense that we cannot ignore. Serena was silent, her eyes downcast. I think that's not what really happened, the detective continued. You heard your husband's confession. You were shocked and angry. You took a knife from the house and went to the beach. There was no struggle, no attack on his part. You killed him in a state of severe emotional distress and then tried to stage self-defense. Serena looked up, tears in her eyes. What difference does it make? She asked quietly. Wasn't what he did violent? He killed a woman, covered up the crime, and then deliberately came into my life, manipulated me, made me love him. Isn't that a form of violence? Legally, there is a difference between murder and passion and self-defense. Peterson replied, but I'm not a judge or a jury. My job is to determine the truth. Lieutenant Tavis Peterson sat in his office, immersed in the Tompkins case file. It had been 2 weeks since MOO's murder, and in that time, the investigation had progressed considerably. On the wall in front of him hung a board with photos, notes, and diagrams linking the key elements of the case. In the center was a photo of Lillian and MO from their wedding, happy faces. Unaware of the tragedy that awaited them, Detective Nakia Pute entered the office holding a folder of new documents. I have the results of the forensic analysis of MOO's diaries, she said, placing the folder on the desk. You won't believe what we found. Were found in a safe in the William, New York, apartment. Serena didn't know they existed. Another secret her husband kept. Was he really recording everything? Peterson opened the folder, looking through photocopied pages of the diary, like he wanted to leave a confession in case something happened. Pute nodded. A detailed description of Tasha Morton's murder, a plan to get close to Serena, even a list of qualities that made her perfect for his purposes. Peterson immersed himself in the reading. Mike's notes were methodical, almost clinical in their accuracy. He described the fight with Tasha, her threats to tell everyone about his cheating, the sudden burst of rage, the jolt, the fatal fall, then the panic, the decision to dispose of the body, the elaborate lie about her departure. But most disturbing of all were the records of Serena. Mateo had been watching her for months, studying her habits, her tastes, her social circle. He had chosen her for a reason. She was the complete opposite of Tasha. Calm, poised, trusting. The perfect redemption, as he called her. He was a sociopath, Peterson said quietly, closing the folder. All this time, playing the role of a loving husband, using it as a tool to clear his conscience. And he's been planning every move in cold blood. Pute added, you know, I'm beginning to understand, Lillian. To find out that the last years of your life were someone's carefully planned manipulation. It could have broken anyone. Peterson tapped his fingers on the table thoughtfully. A fuller picture of what had happened was beginning to form in his mind. We've also gotten statements from former colleagues of Mozo's, Pute continued. Several of the women admitted that he took an unhealthy interest in them, stalked them, and wouldn't take no for an answer. One even filed a complaint with HR, but then took it back. She says Mkayo threatened her career. So Tasha wasn't an exception. Peterson nodded. Just the first to get out of his control. And probably not the last, Pute said grimly. Who knows what would have happened to Serena if she hadn't reacted the way she did? Peterson stood up and walked over to the board, scrutinizing the photos and notes. We need to talk to her again, he said. Now that we have the diaries and witness statements, maybe she'll be more forthcoming. Zariah William looked exhausted as she was led into the interrogation room. 2 weeks of unrelenting stress, sleepless nights, and agonizing deliberation had left their mark on her face. But there was still determination in her eyes. Mrs. William, Peterson began, sitting down opposite her. We have discovered new evidence in recent days that sheds light on your husband's character and actions. I think the time has come for full candor. Serena looked up at him tiredly. What evidence? Peterson opened the folder and placed a photocopy of a page from Mo's diary in front of her. We found his personal notes. He detailed the murder of Tasha Morton as well as his plan to get close to you. Serena took the page, ran her eyes over the lines written in her husband's neat handwriting. Her hands trembled slightly. He called me his redemption, she said quietly, handing the sheet back, as if I were not a human being, but some kind of an instrument to clear his conscience. We also got statements from his former co-workers, Peterson continued. It seems your husband had a history of manipulative and controlling behavior toward women. Serena nodded as if that confirmed her own suspicions. He's always been very persistent, even in the smallest things. I wrote it off as caring, but now I realize it was controlled. Mrs. William, Peterson leaned forward. I believe your husband's confession on the beach came as a great shock to you. I realize that you may have been acting in a state of great emotional distress, but we need the truth about what happened that night. Serena was silent for several long seconds, then took a deep breath. I lied about self-defense, she finally said. There was no attack on his part. After his confession, I don't know how to describe it. It was like my whole world fell apart in an instant. Everything I thought was real turned out to be a lie. And you took the knife from the house and went to the beach? Peterson said softly. Yes, Serena nodded. Originally, I just wanted to talk to him to demand an explanation. But on the way out, I went into the kitchen and saw the knife, and something clicked in my head. I suddenly imagined how he had planned every moment of our chance meeting, every step of our relationship, how he'd used me all these years. Her voice shook, but she kept talking as if a dam had burst. When I found him on the beach, he looked so calm, like he'd taken a heavy weight off his shoulders. He said he hoped I'd understand, that I could forgive, that I'd see what a good man he'd become because of me. Serena grinned bitterly. Because of me, like I was the cure for his illness, not a person with feelings and a life of my own. And in that moment, I just couldn't help myself. I pulled out a knife and I stabbed him once right through the heart. Did you realize what you were doing? Peterson asked. Yes and no, Lillian answered uncertainty. It was like a dream. I could see myself from the outside, but I couldn't stop. And then when he fell, I realized what I'd done, and I panicked. I tried to make it look like an accident. Hide the knife. It's stupid, isn't it? It's a natural reaction, Peterson said. Fear, panic, trying to avoid consequences. Lillian shook her head. I'm not proud of what I did. Not of the murder, nor of trying to cover it up. But I can't say I'm sorry. It's horrible, isn't it? Human emotions are complicated, Mrs. William, Peterson replied. Especially in extreme situations. What's going to happen now? Serena asked, looking up at him. Your confession will be recorded, and the case will be turned over to the prosecutor, Peterson explained. Given the circumstances, your husband's manipulative behavior, his confession to the murder, your emotional state, there's a chance the charge will be reduced to manslaughter or murder under the influence. Serena nodded, accepting the information. Thank you for your honesty, detective, and for understanding. As Lillian was led away, Peterson remained seated in the interrogation room, staring at his notes. This case had hit him harder than he'd expected. After 20 years on the force, he'd seen plenty of murders. Brutal, senseless, cold-blooded. But the case of Serena William was different. Pute entered the room, interrupting his musings. Is everything all right? She asked, noticing the pensive expression on her partner's face. I'm not sure, Peterson answered honestly. This case, it's not black and white, you know. I do, Pute nodded, sitting down next to her. Technically, she's guilty of murder, but morally, it's a lot harder, Peterson finished for her. Macchio William was a manipulator and murderer who used Lillian as a tool for his own redemption. He robbed her of her ability to make informed choices by building their relationship on lies. And yet she killed a man, Pute noted. It's our job to follow the letter of the law, Peterson said. I know, Pute replied, but sometimes the law doesn't take into account the nuances of human psychology. That conversation continued later that evening when the detectives met with District Attorney Millen Griffith to discuss the case. The prosecutor, an experienced lawyer with a reputation for being tough but fair, listened carefully to their report. So, we have a full confession, Griffith summarized, and a lot of mitigating circumstances. Exactly, Peterson nodded. The murder wasn't premeditated in the classic sense. She acted in a state of extreme emotional distress after learning that her husband had not only killed his ex-girlfriend, but had purposefully manipulated her throughout their relationship. Plus, we have evidence of Tompkins's manipulative and controlling behavior. Pute added, diaries, co-worker testimony, confirmation of Tasha Morton's murder. Griffith tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the table. Murder by passion, he finally said.
If you're enjoying this story, kindly do us a favor and subscribe to our channel. It is free and won't cost anything, but it means the world to us. We're just a small channel trying to grow. Thank you, and back to the video.
Things considered, it's the fairest charge, but the decision will ultimately rest with the court and the jury. How much time is she facing? Peterson asked. 3 to 10 years, depending on the court's decision, Griffith said, with the possibility of parole after serving the minimum term. Peterson nodded. Not an ideal outcome, but better than the life sentence Serena would have faced if charged with first-degree premeditated murder. When the news reached the public, the reaction was mixed. The Tompkins case became a media sensation. The story of a woman who killed her husband after he confessed to killing another woman garnered national attention. Supporters and detractors of Serena emerged. Some saw her as a victim of circumstances, others as a cold-blooded killer. The hashtags #FreeLillian and #JusticeForMacchio emerged on social media. Television pundits discussed the legal and moral aspects of the case. Activists organized rallies both in support of and against Serena. On the day of the trial, the Braga courthouse was surrounded by journalists and demonstrators. Serena, dressed in a strict navy blue suit, held her dignity despite the barrage of cameras and shouts from the crowd. Her attorney, Imani Crawford, an experienced criminal defense attorney, walked beside her, protecting her ward from excessive media attention. Peterson watched the scene from the window of his car parked nearby. He was about to testify and he felt unusually nervous. For the first time in his career, he wasn't sure whether he was on the side of the law or the man who had broken the law. Nervous? Pute asked, sitting behind the wheel. A little, Peterson admitted. This is not a routine case. No, she agreed. But our job is to present the facts. It's up to the court to decide. I know, Peterson nodded. I just can't stop thinking that any one of us could have been in Lillian's shoes. One moment, one decision made in a state of extreme emotional distress, and lives are changed forever. That's true, Pute agreed quietly. And you know what the worst part is? If M.O. hadn't confessed, if he'd kept playing the role of the perfect husband, no one would have ever known the truth. Not about Tasha, not about his manipulation of Serena. That thought haunted Peterson throughout the trial. He testified as objectively as possible, describing both the circumstances of the murder and the evidence that showed the manipulative nature of M.O. Tompkins and his involvement in Tasha Morton's disappearance. The trial lasted 3 weeks. The jury heard testimony from experts, witnesses, examined M.O.'s diaries, and read Serena's psychological evaluation. The parties' final arguments were emotional and compelling. Prosecutor Griffith, true to his word, did not demand the maximum penalty, but insisted on responsibility for the crime. Attorney Crawford emphasized her client's psychological state and M.O.'s manipulative behavior. When the jury retired to reach a verdict, Peterson remained in the courtroom watching Lillian. She sat motionless, staring in front of her. There was no fear in her eyes, only weariness and humility. The jury deliberated for less than 2 hours, an unusually short time for such a complex case. When they returned, the courtroom was completely silent. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" asked the judge. "Yes, Your Honor," replied the foreman, a tall man with glasses. "On the charge of the murder of M.O. William, we find the defendant, Serena Higgs William, guilty of manslaughter under the influence." A whisper rippled through the room. Serena closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping slightly, not out of disappointment, but as if relieved that it had finally been decided. The judge, a middle-aged woman with a shrewd eye, had set the date for the verdict to be announced in a week. As Lillian was led out of the courtroom, she met Peterson's gaze and nodded slightly, not in gratitude, but rather as an acknowledgement of the role he'd played in uncovering the full truth. On the day the verdict was announced, the courtroom was packed. Judge Elaine Carter scrutinized the case file, listened to the parties' final statements, and Serena's own address to the court. "I am not asking for leniency," Serena said in a calm voice. "I accept responsibility for my actions, but I want everyone to know that what happened on the beach was the culmination of a long history of manipulation and lies. I acted not out of revenge, but out of a deep sense of betrayal and loss of control over my own life." Judge Carter nodded, taking her words to heart. After a short recess, she returned with a decision. "Mrs. William," she began, "this case is unusually complex morally and legally. On the one hand, you have committed the grave crime of taking a man's life. On the other hand, The circumstances that led to that act cannot be ignored. The judge paused, looking at Serena carefully, taking into account all the facts, including your husband's confession to the murder, his manipulative behavior towards you, as well as the psychologist's conclusion about your emotional state at the time of the crime. I sentence you to 5 years in prison with the possibility of parole in 2 years. A sigh ran through the room. Some thought the sentence was too lenient, some too harsh. Serena simply nodded, accepting the court's decision. After the trial was over, Peterson and Pute stood on the courthouse steps, watching Serena being led away in a police van. "Do you think it's a fair sentence?" Pute asked. Peterson thought for a moment. "I don't know what justice is in a case like this," he answered honestly. "She committed murder, and she should be held accountable, but 5 years seems adequate, all things considered." "I agree," Pute nodded. "Although, part of me thinks that if she'd gone to the police right after she confessed to MO, the story might have ended differently." "Maybe," Peterson agreed. "But people rarely think rationally in a moment of great emotional distress." They walked slowly down the steps toward their car. "You know what bothers me most about this case?" Peterson asked. "How many other Mako Tompkins exist in the world? How many people hide their dark secrets behind a facade of normality, manipulating those around them? And how many Tasha Mortons are still missing, when in fact their bodies are hidden somewhere in the woods?" he added grimly. They walked to the car in silence, each absorbed in his own thoughts. When Pute started the engine, Peterson took one last look at the courthouse. "We were taught in the academy that the law exists to protect the innocent and punish the guilty," he said. "But sometimes the line between guilt and innocence isn't as clear as we'd like it to be. That's why we're detectives, not judges," she said. "Our job is to find the truth. It's up to others to decide what to do with that truth." Peterson nodded, agreeing with his partner. As they drove away from the courthouse, he couldn't help but think of Serena Williams, the woman who had been both victim and perpetrator, the puppet and the one who had cut the strings. The Tompkins case was officially closed, but it left a deep mark on the detective's soul. It reminded him of the thin line between justice and retribution, the complexity of human psychology, and the fact that sometimes the worst monsters wear the mask of ordinary people. And most importantly, that true justice does not always coincide with the letter of the law, and that in a world full of shades of gray, sometimes you have to make decisions that seem right at the time of their adoption, but can change your whole life in an instant.